And the New York Times has a story on Kamala Harris's barrier-breaking bid for US president. Democrats are sending American women a more sober and urgent message. This is 8 years after Hillary Clinton became the first woman to lead a major party's presidential ticket. Well, for more on that story and a few others making headlines today, we're now joined by former diplomat Ian Camish. A very good morning to you, Ian.
Good morning.
Morning to you both.
Let's go back to that story about 8 years after Hillary Clinton's bid for the White House. America now is sending another woman to the White House. But it's a very different time, isn't it? So a different message?
Yeah, this piece is an interesting one. It talks quite a bit about how things have changed since Hillary Clinton launched her bid to be first woman president of the US 8 years ago. Ultimately, I read it as a more hopeful piece. It does make the point that the ground has shifted to the point where a win for Kamala Harris as the female candidate is perhaps more in reach this time. As you're saying, though, it's a less optimistic and a much more serious message. And, you know, there's an obvious point here. It's a very obvious point. The landscape on reproductive rights has changed in ways that people just didn't imagine in 2016. Nobody understood that a man who'd bragged about sexual assault would win, again be a contender, and that his Supreme Court nominees would help erase the constitutional right to abortion. So those rights under Roe versus Wade just didn't seem vulnerable to most people then. And there's a point here that this is an important motivator and a rallying point, certainly for women, and as speakers at the Democratic National Convention also emphasised, for many men. Also makes a point that Kamala is speaking less overtly about the glass ceiling and about being the first woman. You know, the language about learning from her mother that anything's possible certainly might bring to mind her gender, but also brings to mind other things, you know, her socioeconomic and racial background. And I sort of read the point here that there's still very much a pioneering quality about Kamala's bid, but that it in some ways has a broader base.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point to make, because I think while other people are making a lot of the fact that Kamala Harris would be the first female US president if she got into the White House, including, in fact, Hillary Clinton, who, when she spoke at the Democratic National Convention, spoke of the highest, hardest glass ceiling. Yeah. Kamala Harris herself is not actually making a big thing of that and in her messaging.
Yeah, others are making it for her. And as I say, I feel that she has a broader set of points to make. That she's a woman is self-evident. If she becomes the first woman to be president of the United States, that in itself will be something to celebrate enormously. But she's seeking to make a broader appeal against a much more serious landscape.
Ian, let's move on to this other article, this one from the Politico, talking, of course, about this recent deadly knife attack that happened in the country. And Germany's far right is seizing on this to criticise the moderate centre-right of not doing enough on security and immigration. Yeah,
this is really quite disturbing. We have elections due to take place in two eastern German states, in Thuringen and in Saxony, on the 1st of September, so only about a week away. And this has come at a very awkward time, I think, for those who are opposed to the rise of the far right, who are very strong in those states of eastern Germany, for reasons to do with, you know, how those states have been left behind. As I think you know, I'm a former ambassador to Germany, and I find this really quite striking and a bit disturbing. I'm struck by how the far right is taking the opportunity of the knife attack in Zerlingen to seek to push ahead with its agenda. You know, its point that this is what migration brings to the country. It looks, by the way, exactly like the same playbook as the far right were using in the UK only about a month ago after those awful attacks in Southport. You know, I see ISIS has now claimed responsibility, so the act itself seems a bit different to the act in the UK. But I think the point about this article is that the far right in Europe still seems to be on the march. Yes, it might have failed just to win government in France recently, but it derives quite a bit of momentum from this kind of act.
I was going to say it's clearly resonating with the public. What happens in Germany there?
Look, Germany is a country which, to some extent, is haunted by its past. It's the far right is regarded by the majority of Germans, even now, as anathema. There are ghosts there of a particularly difficult experience they obviously had in the 1930s and 1940s with the rise of the Nazis. It's always there a bit in the background for them. And there are so many Germans who are so fundamentally opposed to any political group that speaks the same kind of language. Nonetheless, the country has seen a level of migration that it's not used to in the course of the last 10 years. And these parties have been able to sort of find fertile ground in the anxiety about this, particularly in those eastern states that are going to the polls in a few days' time, places which have been left behind to some extent in the ultimate success story of the unification of Germany.
Ian Kemish, always great to have your insights on Weekend Breakfast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.